the thing about working in a bookstore is that you stop seeing books as sacred objects pretty quickly. Within a month, they're inventory. Within 3 months, they're weight things you lift, shelve, or rearrange and haul to the discount table when they stop moving. You still love reading. You just develop a professional distance from the physical objects themselves. The way a surgeon probably stops being impressed by the elegance of a rib cage. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that I was never the type to get mystical about a book. I didn't walk into Bellwether Books on my first day with wide eyes and a reverence for the written word that would make me easy prey for some dark curiosity. I was 27, recently separated from a man who'd made me feel like a rough draft of a person for 4 years, and I needed a job that wouldn't require me to perform happiness for 8 hours a day. Bookstores are good for that, and nobody expects you to smile. They expect you to know where the Brontes are, and they leave you alone. Bellwether Books sat on the corner of Alcott and Pine, in a neighborhood that had been up and coming for about 15 years without ever fully arriving. The building was old, exposed brick, warped hardwood floors, tall windows that let in these long rectangles of afternoon light that moved across the shelves like slow searchlights. It had 3 rooms. The main floor with fiction, poetry, and new releases. The back room with non-fiction, used books, and a permanent smell of Earl Grey. And Judith's office, which was upstairs, small, and always slightly warmer than the rest of the building, as if the heat in the store rose and collected there like a held breath. Judith Crane owned Bellwether Books. She was 63 when I started, tall and thin in a way that made her look elegant rather than frail, with silver hair. She kept short and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck like jewelry. Judith was warm. That's the first thing everyone said about her. Warm. She remembered every regular's name, their kids' names, what they'd bought last time. She'd press a book into a customer's hands and say, "I think this one's for you." And she was right so often it felt less like good salesmanship and more like some low-level psychic ability. People loved her. I loved her, in the careful, arm's-length way I loved most people back then. Ellis was the other full-time employee. He'd been at Bellwether for 3 years before I arrived and had the comfortable, slightly proprietary air of someone who'd staked a quiet claim on the place. Early 30s, dark-haired, the kind of face that looked serious until he smiled, and then it restructured into something surprisingly open. Ellis was funny in a dry, observational way that I didn't appreciate at first. It took me a few weeks to realize that half of what he said was a joke. We became friends the way people who close a store together every night become friends, through the accumulation of small shared hours, through the slow erosion of the social performance you do around people you don't know yet. By my 6th month, Ellis was probably the person I was most honest with. He didn't ask about my ex. He didn't try to fix me. He just handed me the pricing gun and told me bad puns about Dostoevsky while we restocked the Russian literature section. Tamsin came on part-time about a year after me. 22, just out of college, eager in a way that made Ellis and me feel ancient. She was good at the job, quick, organized, good with customers, but she hadn't yet developed the bookstore employee's essential skill of looking busy while doing absolutely nothing. She'd organize the same shelf 3 times in an hour if left unsupervised. I'm telling you about these people because what happened wasn't a thing that happened to me alone in a dark room. With the walls closing in, it happened inside a set of relationships. It moved through the spaces between us, and it destroyed the most important one I had. Judith told me about the book on my first day. Not dramatically. She didn't pull me aside. Didn't lower her voice, didn't build it up. It came in the middle of a 20-minute orientation that also covered where we kept the receipt paper, how to work the ancient cash register, and the fact that the bathroom lock stuck if you turned it too far to the left. "One more thing," she said as we stood in her office. She nodded toward the shelf behind her desk, a high one near the ceiling, reachable only with the step stool she kept in the corner. There were a few things up there, a ceramic vase, a framed photo of a dog, and a book. It was unremarkable. Brown cover, no dust jacket, no visible title on the spine. It could have been a ledger, an old journal, anything. "That book's not for sale," Judith said. "Not for shelving, not for reading. Don't worry about why." She said it the same way she'd said the thing about the bathroom lock, a practical instruction. No mystery, no weight. I nodded. and we moved on to lunch break policy. For 2 years, the book didn't occupy my thoughts any more than the broken tile by the front door or the radiator in the back room that clanked every afternoon at 3. It was part of the landscape. I saw it when I went into Judith's office to ask about orders or grab the extra stapler, and I didn't think about it. That's the truth. I know how these stories usually go. The narrator is consumed by curiosity from day one, drawn to the forbidden thing like a moth, unable to resist. That wasn't me. I had enough going on in my actual life without constructing a mystery around a book my boss didn't want me to touch. The things I noticed about Judith, I noticed slowly, and I didn't connect them to the book until much later. Like the way she always seemed to know when a customer needed help before they looked up from the shelf. Not good intuition, precision. A customer would be frowning at a back cover, not yet ready to ask a question, and Judith would appear beside them with exactly the right suggestion, as if she'd been reading over their shoulder from across the room, or the way she handled difficult people. We got our share, the impatient, the condescending, the occasional belligerent. Judith diffused every one of them with a sentence or two, and the sentences were always startlingly specific. Not, I understand your frustration, but you're not really angry about the return policy. You're having a terrible week, and this is the first thing you felt like you could control. She'd say things like that gently to strangers, and they'd crumble every time. Ellis and I joked about it. Judith's doing her witch thing again, he'd say, watching her guide a weeping college student to a chair and a cup of tea. We meant it fondly. It was one of her charms. It never occurred to us that it might be something else. The night Ellis read the book was a Tuesday in October. I remember because Tuesdays were our closing nights, just the two of us, doing the end-of-day routine while the store emptied and the street outside went dark. It was raining, a steady, windless rain that flattened the light from the street lamps into yellow smears on the wet pavement. We'd had a slow day. Ellis had been quiet, which wasn't unusual. He had quiet days. But there was something underneath it that I'd been trying not to name. A restlessness. He kept starting sentences and abandoning them. He reorganized his staff picks shelf twice, which was my job. And when I pointed that out, he just said, "Yeah, sorry," and walked away. By 9:30, the store was closed, the register was balanced, and I was sweeping the front room. I called out to Ellis to ask if he'd locked the back door, and he didn't answer. I assumed he was in the bathroom, the lock stuck. Sometimes he was in there for 5 minutes, just fighting the handle. I kept sweeping. When he still hadn't appeared, 10 minutes later, I went looking. The bathroom was empty. The back room was empty. The stockroom was dark. Judith's office door was open, and the light was on. I found him sitting in Judith's chair, behind her desk. The book was open in his lap. He was crying. Not sobbing, not making any sound at all. Tears were running down his face the way water runs down a window. Steady and seemingly involuntary, as if his eyes were doing something his body hadn't authorized. He was staring at the open pages, but his eyes weren't moving. He wasn't reading. He was finished. "Ellis," I said, from the doorway, "what are you doing?" He didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression was the strangest thing I had ever seen on a human face. Not fear, not guilt, not wonder, but something I didn't have a word for. Like he was seeing me for the first time and recognizing me from somewhere at the same time. Like he was calculating something enormous in his head, and the answer had come up as my name. "I thought it would be words," he said. His voice was thick, he cleared his throat. "I thought it would be, I don't know, writing language, something I could describe." "What is it?" He looked down at the open pages, then carefully closed the book. He stood up, climbed the step stool, and placed it back on the high shelf exactly where it had been. His movements were precise, deliberate, like someone handling something they now understood to be more delicate or more dangerous than they'd initially assumed. "Ellis," I said again. "Talk to me. I was being stupid," he said. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "It's nothing. Old book. I wanted to know. You know how it is? I did know how it is. I just hadn't wanted to know badly enough to do what he'd done." We locked up and walked to the bus stop together. The rain had stopped, and the streets had that post-rain clarity, where everything looks sharp-edged and close. Ellis didn't speak. I didn't push. We'd known each other long enough for a silence to be comfortable between us, But this silence had a different texture, not comfortable, not hostile, but occupied. Like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. He came to work the next morning, looking tired but normal. When I asked if he wanted to talk about it, he said, "Honestly, not really. I was just being an idiot. Forget it." He smiled, and the smile was the right shape, and I told myself to let it go. For about a week, I did. The changes started small enough that I might have imagined them. Ellis had always been good with customers. He listened well. He had good taste. He could match a person to a book with reasonable accuracy. But in the days after he read the book, his accuracy went from reasonable to uncanny. A teenager wandered in one afternoon, clearly dragged there by a parent, radiating boredom. Ellis walked over, pulled a book from a shelf without looking, and handed it to the kid. "Try this," he said. The teenager looked at the cover, and something shifted in his face, a spark of reluctant interest. His mother bought it. She came back a week later to say her son had read it twice and was asking for more by the same author. That could have been a good guess. Ellis read widely. He knew our inventory, but it kept happening. A woman in a business suit, clearly rushed, clearly not the type to browse. Ellis intercepted her at the door and handed her a slim novel. "Trust me," he said. She bought it without asking what it was about. An elderly man who came in every Thursday to look at history books and never buy anything. Ellis pointed him to a memoir in the biography section. Something about a Polish resistance fighter. The man bought it, his first purchase in what Judith said was over a year, and the next Thursday he came back and bought 2 more. I noticed, but I didn't worry. Ellis was having a good run. People have those. Then Mrs. Thorne came in. Mrs. Thorne was a retired English teacher, mid-70s, who came in every Saturday morning and spent an hour in the poetry section. She was sharp, funny, and privately lonely in a way that was obvious if you paid attention. She always lingered at the counter, extending the transaction, asking questions she already knew the answers to. I liked her. Everyone did. On this particular Saturday, Ellis was at the register when Mrs. Thorne brought up her selections. They chatted, nothing unusual, and then Ellis said, very quietly, "Mrs. Thorne, do you still talk to your daughter?" Mrs. Thorne's face changed. Not offended, not confused, caught. Like someone had opened a door she thought she'd locked. "We haven't spoken in a while," she said carefully. "Call her today," Ellis said. I know it's not my place, but call her today." Before this evening, Mrs. Thorne looked at him for a long moment. Something passed between them that I couldn't read. Then she nodded, picked up her bag, and left without saying goodbye. That evening, Mrs. Thorne's daughter was in a car accident on the interstate. She was on the phone with her mother when she noticed the truck drifting into her lane and swerved. She was fine. A broken wrist, some glass cuts. The paramedic said if she hadn't been alert, if she'd been looking at her GPS or changing the radio, she wouldn't have seen the truck in time. Mrs. Thorne called the store on Monday. She wanted to thank Ellis. She was crying. She asked how he'd known. Ellis, standing next to me at the register, held the phone slightly away from his ear so I could hear. His face was expressionless. When Mrs. Thorne asked again, "How did you know, Ellis?" he said, "I just had a feeling." And his voice was flat in a way I'd never heard from him before. Not cold, empty, like the answer exhausted him to give. After he hung up, I waited. The store was quiet. Tamsin was on her lunch break. It was just us. "Don't," Ellis said without looking at me. "Don't what?" "Don't ask me how. Because I don't know how. Not in any way I can explain." Ellis. I looked at her face. At her hands, the way she set her bag down on the counter. She always puts it on the left, but she put it on the right, and her breathing was shallow, not anxious, not rushed, anticipatory, like she was waiting for something bad. And there was this thing, with her eyes the way she kept glancing at her phone without picking it up, and I saw it, all of it, the whole pattern. And the pattern said someone she loved was in danger, and she already sensed it, but wasn't going to act on it without a push. He said all of this fast, like he'd been holding it in, and the seal had broken. "That's not intuition," I said. "No," he agreed, "it's not." He told Tamsin about the apartment 2 days later. Tamsin had been excited about a new place she'd found. A 1-bedroom in a neighborhood she liked. Good rent, available immediately. She showed us the listing photos on her phone. Ellis looked at them for about 10 seconds and said, "Don't sign the lease." Tamsin laughed, thinking he was joking. When she saw his face, she stopped laughing. The bathroom photos, Ellis said, the way the paint bubbles near the baseboard, and the listing says new ventilation system. But look at the window frames in the bedroom. There's condensation damage. That place has mold behind the walls. The landlord knows. That's why the rent is low. Tamsin was skeptical, but shaken enough to hire an inspector before signing. The inspector found black mold behind the bathroom tiles and in the bedroom ceiling. The landlord had painted over visible growth and installed a ventilation system to manage the smell. Tamsin would have been breathing it every night. She thanked Ellis, he said, "Don't mention it," and went to the stockroom and didn't come out for an hour. That night after closing, I sat down across from him at the small table in the back room where we usually ate lunch. He had a cup of tea in front of him that he wasn't drinking. He looked tired, not sleepy, but depleted, like someone who'd been translating between 2 languages in his head all day. "I need you to tell me what's happening," I said. Not "I had a feeling," not a good guess. What's actually happening? Ellis was quiet for a long time. He turned the teacup slowly, watching the surface of the liquid tilt. "When I look at people now," he said, "I don't see what I used to see. I don't see a face that's happy or sad or angry. I see the machinery, the micro movements, the blood flow under the skin, the tension patterns in the muscles around the eyes. There are 43 muscles in the human face. Did you know that? 43. And every combination means something. Every sequence is a sentence. And I can read all of them now, simultaneously, without trying." He looked up at me. "Right now, for instance. The way you're sitting, your left hand is gripping the edge of the table, but your right hand is open. That means part of you wants to leave this conversation and part of you needs it to continue. Your jaw is set slightly to the right, which you do, when you're suppressing a question you think might be hurtful. And you called your mother this morning." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had called my mother that morning. It had not gone well. "She asked about money," Ellis continued. His voice was gentle, but the gentleness was worse than cruelty. "You told her you were fine. You're not fine. You've been checking your bank balance on your phone every few hours for the past 3 days. You hold your phone at a specific angle when you're looking at something that worries you, tilted slightly away from your body, like you're trying to distance yourself from the screen. You did it 4 times during your shift today." "Stop," I said. He stopped. He looked down at his tea. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't always. The filter used to be automatic. The social filter, the thing that keeps you from saying everything you notice. Mine is eroding. It's like I have to manually choose not to say each thing. And there are so many things all the time that some of them get through." Is this because of the book? I don't know what the book did. I don't know what I read. It wasn't text. Not in any alphabet I recognize it. It was more like a diagram, a schematic, and looking at it rearranged something in the way I process visual information or the way I process people. I'm not psychic. I don't read minds. I read faces and bodies and patterns. And I do it now at a resolution that I didn't have access to before, and I can't turn it down. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen before in someone I knew well. Distance, not emotional distance, perceptual distance. He was seeing me from a vantage point I couldn't reach, and the gap between what he saw and what I knew he saw made the air between us feel thin. I want to tell you that I handled it well. That I was supportive, steady, the good friend, but the truth is that after that conversation, I started avoiding Ellis. Not obviously, I didn't swap shifts or refuse to talk to him. I just stopped volunteering for the moments of closeness that had made our friendship what it was. No more lingering after closing. No more shared lunches in the back room. When he said something perceptive about a customer, I smiled and changed the subject, instead of asking how he knew. Because here's the thing. Nobody tells you about intimacy. It requires gaps, it requires not knowing. The space between what I show you and what I actually feel. That's where trust lives. Not in transparency, but in the mutual agreement to let each other be partially opaque. Ellis couldn't do that anymore. When I was with him, I was glass. He saw every crack, every inclusion, every stress point, and I couldn't bear it. He knew I was pulling away. Of course he did. He probably knew the exact neurological process by which my discomfort was converting into avoidance. And he didn't call me on it, which was worse than if he had, because it meant he understood why. And understanding why meant he'd already processed my betrayal through whatever alien calculus the book had installed in his brain, and he decided it was inevitable. Our friendship didn't die. It was worse than that. It was translated into a language only one of us could speak. Around this time, Ellis started writing. I'd find him in the stockroom during his breaks, hunched over a notebook, filling pages with small, dense handwriting. Not words exactly. Or not only words, I caught a glimpse once, over his shoulder, before he noticed me and closed the notebook. What I saw looked like a cross between text and a circuit diagram. Sentences that branched and reconnected. Words linked by lines and arrows. Clusters of symbols I didn't recognize nested between passages of English. It was dense, intricate, and gave me the immediate impression of something being mapped rather than written. "What is that?" I asked. "Notes," he said. "Just notes." "Notes on what?" He considered this. "Grammar," he said, and didn't elaborate. 2 weeks after the incident with Mrs. Thorne, I went upstairs and knocked on Judith's office door. She was reading, she was always reading, and she looked up over her glasses with the patient. Attentive expression she gave everyone who came to her with a question. "I need to ask you about the book," I said. She took off her glasses, set them down on the desk, folded her hands. "How long ago did he read it?" she said. I felt the floor shift under me. Not literally, but the vertigo of realizing that someone has been 5 steps ahead of you the entire time. "I didn't tell you anyone read it. You didn't have to." She gestured at the chair across from her desk. I sat. "I can see it in how you're carrying yourself. The tension in your shoulders changed about 2 weeks ago. You've been avoiding the back room, where you and Ellis usually eat lunch. And you have a specific expression you make when you're worried about someone and trying not to show it. Your eyebrows draw together about 1 millimeter. Not enough for most people to catch. You've been making that face every time Ellis walks past the counter." She said all of this the same way Ellis had. Precisely, without malice, like reading aloud from a document. "Oh," I said. "Yeah," she said. "Oh, you read the book 30 years ago, before I owned the store. Before the store was a bookstore. It was a failing print shop when I bought it. I purchased the building because of the book. Or rather, because of what the book did to me and what I decided to do about that." She told me her story. She'd been a graduate student in linguistics. A fitting irony she didn't seem to appreciate when she found the book at an estate sale in Vermont. An old man had died, and his children were selling everything. The book was in a box of miscellaneous items, unremarkable, unlabeled. She bought the box for $10 that night, in her apartment. She opened the book and spent 6 hours with it. "The same as Ellis?" I asked. "The perception?" It started the same. Seeing the patterns in faces, the hidden architecture of expression. Within a week, I could walk into a room and know every relationship, every tension, every unspoken negotiation happening between every person present. It was like learning to read all over again, but the text was, "People, what happened?" She was quiet for a moment. It kept going. The perception didn't plateau. It deepened. First faces, then body language, then vocal patterns, the micro tremors in someone's voice that reveal the difference between a felt emotion and a performed one. Then it went further. I started perceiving patterns between people, not just individuals, networks. I could see how a lie told by one person would ripple outward through a community. How an act of generosity was connected to a guilt 3 relationships removed. How entire social structures were held together by collective agreements to not see certain things. How far did it go? She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something behind her warmth. Not coldness, something more like the memory of cold. A scar from an old burn. Long healed, but the skin still tight. "Far enough to frighten me into stopping," she said. "Stopping?" I chose to stop looking. You can if you catch it early enough. It's like any perception. You can learn to unfocus your eyes. I taught myself to skim instead of read, to let the surface be enough. It took years, and it cost me things I'll never get back. I looked at her then, really looked with whatever limited perception I had, and I saw what I'd been looking at for 2 years without understanding. Judith's warmth was real, but it was constructed. Each kind word, each perfectly timed gesture of care, they were accurate. They were exactly what the situation required, but they were produced, not felt. She was performing empathy with the precision of someone who could see exactly what empathy looked like but had lost access to the original emotion. No family photos in the office, no personal calls during the day, no one picking her up after work, no stories about weekends, no casual mentions of a life outside the store. Judith had relationships the way a textbook has chapters, organized, purposeful, and fundamentally informational. "You're alone," I said. She didn't flinch. That's the cost of stabilizing. When you can see everything about a person, you can't unsee it. And when you can't unsee it, you can't participate in the normal negotiations, the small deceptions that make closeness possible. I know when someone is attracted to me and why. I know when a friendship is motivated by need rather than affection. I know when someone's kindness is a transaction. And I can't pretend I don't know. So I keep people at the distance where the knowledge is manageable. And Alice, her expression shifted, a hairline fracture in the performance. Alice is further along than I was at this stage. The perception is accelerating in him. I've been watching. Why didn't you stop him? You knew the book was there. You knew what it could do. I leave the office unlocked because the book isn't something you can guard with a lock. It reaches the people it's going to reach. I learned that a long time ago. All I can do is be here when they come out the other side. Come out the other side? How? She didn't answer that. Not then. Over the next 2 weeks, Ellis deteriorated. Not physically. He looked the same. Maybe thinner. Maybe more shadows under his eyes from the insomnia he'd stopped trying to hide. But something behind his expression was changing. The distance I'd seen growing in his eyes widened into something that looked less like detachment and more like vertigo. He was someone standing on the edge of something vast, looking down. He still came to work, he still shelved books, worked the register, talked to customers, but his interactions took on a strange quality, an almost surgical kindness. He would say exactly the right thing to each person, not a word more or less, and then withdraw, as if the effort of calibrating each human exchange was using up something he couldn't replenish. One evening, near closing, he found me in the poetry section and stood there until I looked up. He was holding one of his notebooks, the one with the dense, branching writing. "I need to tell you something," he said. We sat in the back room. The store was empty. Rain again. The same windless, steady kind as the night he'd read the book, as if the weather were rhyming. "The patterns I was seeing in people," he said. "Faces, bodies, relationships, and networks. That was the surface layer. Like learning the alphabet. I've been moving past that." Past it to what? There's something underneath. Under the human patterns. A deeper structure. I've been trying to write it down. He tapped the notebook. But it's like trying to transcribe music into a language that has no word for sound. The closest I can get is that it's a kind of grammar. A syntax that everything is written in. Not just people, the room, the light, the way the rain hits the window. It's all structured, it's all a text, and I'm starting to be able to read it. Ellis, that sounds like I'm losing my mind. I know how it sounds, but listen, the night I read the book, I told you it wasn't in any language I recognized. That's true, but it was still readable. The book didn't teach me a language. It gave me a new sense, like someone who's been colorblind, suddenly seeing red. The color was always there. The book just opened a channel. He leaned forward. And there's something in the channel, something that's been there the whole time underneath everything. I don't know what it is, I don't know if it's aware of me, but I can feel it the way you feel a vibration through a floor. Not hearing it, not seeing it, but knowing it's there because everything around you is resonating with it. What does it feel like? He was quiet for a long time. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping the window and filling the room with a brief moving brightness. "It feels like something breathing," he said. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed in my apartment and stared at the ceiling and tried to convince myself that Ellis was having a breakdown. That the book was just a book. An unusual one, maybe, with some kind of optical pattern or visual puzzle that had triggered a neurological event. A seizure. A psychotic episode. Something with a name and a treatment. But Mrs. Thorne's daughter had been in an accident, and Tamsin's apartment had black mold. These weren't delusions. Whatever was happening to Ellis, it was producing real, verifiable information. And that was more frightening than any hallucination, because it meant the world was actually built the way Ellis said it was, and the rest of us were simply too limited to see it. 2 days later, Ellis asked me to read the book. We were alone in the store. Tamsin had called in sick, and Judith had left early, something she almost never did. It was late afternoon, the light coming through the front windows at a low angle, making the dust motes in the air look like a slow constellation. "I need someone else to see what I see," Ellis said. He was standing by the front counter, not looking at me, looking out the window at the street. "Not because I want company, because I'm starting to lose track of which perceptions are real and which are extrapolations. I see patterns so clearly now that I can't tell if I'm observing them or constructing them. And if I'm constructing them, then I'm insane, and I need to know that. And if I'm not constructing them, if what I'm seeing is actually there, then I need someone to verify it. I need a witness." He turned to face me. He looked terrible, not sick, but thin in a way that went beyond his body, as if the substance of him was being consumed by the process of perceiving. His eyes were clear, though, painfully clear. "If you read the book," he said, "and you see what I see, then I'll know it's real. And if it's real, we can figure out what to do about it, together. Here's what I want you to understand about the choice he was asking me to make. It wasn't about rules. Judith had told me not to read the book 2 years ago, and honestly, in that moment, her instruction was the least important factor in my decision. This wasn't about obedience or rebellion. It was about Ellis, my friend, who was standing in front of me looking like a man who'd been treading water for weeks and was about to go under, asking me to jump in with him. Not to save him, just to drown in the same ocean, so he wouldn't drown alone. And part of me wanted to. Not out of loyalty, though there was that out of curiosity. The same curiosity that leads you to the edge of a cliff and makes you look down, not because you want to fall, but because you want to know what falling would look like. Ellis was describing a version of reality that was richer, deeper, more legible than anything I had access to. And the part of me that had always felt like I was missing something. The part that my ex had cultivated. The part that whispered, "You're not enough. You don't see enough. You don't understand enough." That part heard Ellis's description of the book's gift and thought, maybe this is what I've been missing. Maybe this is the thing that would make me feel like a finished draft instead of a rough one. I told him I'd do it. The relief on his face was so naked and so total that it hurt to look at. "Thank you," he said, and his voice cracked on the second word. I waited until that evening after closing. The store was dark, except for the lamp in Judith's office, which I turned on. The building made its nighttime sounds, the settling of old wood, the tick of the cooling radiator, a faint creak from somewhere upstairs that could have been the wind or the building's own slow breathing. I climbed the step stool. The book was where it always was, on the high shelf, between the ceramic vase and the framed photo of the dog. I reached for it and noticed that my hand was steady. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The way you're ready for an answer you've been avoiding. The book was lighter than I expected. It felt like almost nothing in my hands, not heavy like a hardcover, not substantial like a trade paperback, light, warm. The brown cover was smooth, unmarked, and slightly warm to the touch, as if it had been sitting in a patch of sun, though the shelf got no direct light. I opened it. The first page was blank. I turned to the second page, blank, third, fourth. I flipped through the entire book, page by page at first, then faster, fanning through the whole thing in a single motion. Every page was empty. Cream-colored paper, unmarked without so much as a stain or a printing impression. 200 pages of nothing. I stood there for a long time, the book open in my hands, waiting for something to happen, for the text to appear, for a feeling to descend, for the channel Ellis described to open. Nothing. I felt the paper under my fingers. I smelled the faint vanilla and dust scent of old pages. I saw the light from the desk lamp falling across the empty surface, and that was all. The anticlimax should have been a relief. Instead, it felt wrong. Not disappointing, wrong. Like arriving at a house you were told was haunted and finding the front door standing open and the lights on and the table set for dinner and no one home. I put the book back on the shelf and went home and didn't sleep. The next morning, I found Judith in the store before opening. She was arranging the front display with her usual precision, and when I told her what had happened, that I'd opened the book and found it blank, she stopped moving. Not dramatically, she just went still. The way a person goes still when they hear a sound they've been dreading. "It's never been blank," she said. "Well, it is now, every page." She set down the book she'd been holding and turned to face me fully. I'd never seen her afraid before. Judith's emotional range, at least the part she showed, ran from warm to warmer, with occasional detours into firm. But what I saw on her face in that moment wasn't warmth. It was something older and deeper, and much less controlled. "Where's Ellis?" she asked. "He's not here yet. Call him." I pulled out my phone and dialed Ellis's number. The line didn't ring. It didn't go to voicemail. There was nothing, no signal, no error message, no recording telling me the number was out of service. Just silence, as if I dialed a number that had never existed. "It's not connecting," I said. Judith closed her eyes. I went to Ellis's apartment after my shift. He lived in a third-floor walk-up about 20 minutes from the store. I'd been there dozens of times for dinner, for movies, for the kind of aimless evening visits that are the currency of real friendship. I climbed the stairs and knocked on his door. A woman answered. She was in her 40s, wearing a bathrobe, holding a mug of coffee. She looked at me with polite confusion. "I'm looking for Ellis," I said. "He lives here." "I live here," she said. "I've lived here for 4 years." "No, Ellis. He's my coworker. Tall, dark hair, early 30s. This is his apartment, 3B. She looked at me with the careful patience of someone dealing with a confused stranger. "I don't know who that is. This is my apartment, has been since I moved in." I checked the number on the door, 3B. The right floor, the right building, the right apartment. But through the open doorway, I could see furniture I didn't recognize. Photos on the walls of people I'd never met. A life that had been lived in this space for years. No trace of Ellis's mismatched bookshelves. No trace of the poster from that Italian film he loved. No trace of him at all. I went back to the store. I asked Tamsin if she'd heard from Ellis. She looked at me blankly. "Who's Ellis?" she said. "Ellis. He works here. He's worked here for 4 years. Tamsin's expression cycled from confusion to concern. Concern for me. Specifically, the way you look at someone who's saying something that doesn't make sense. "It's just you and me, and Judith," she said. "It's always been just us." I checked the employee records, the schedule, the payroll system. There was no Ellis. There had never been an Ellis, according to every document, every system, every digital and paper trail in the store. The schedule showed 3 employees, Judith, me, and Tamsin. The payroll records went back years. My name appeared, Tamsin's name appeared, Ellis's name appeared nowhere. I went to places we'd been together, the diner where we'd eaten lunch on our days off, the bar where we'd watched a terrible movie on a projector screen, the used bookshop across town where we'd spent a Saturday afternoon arguing about whether Shirley Jackson was better than Poe. I asked staff, I asked regulars, no one recognized his description. No one remembered a man matching his appearance ever being there. Ellis was gone, not dead, not missing, gone. Erased from the record with a thoroughness that went beyond any conceivable human effort. Reality had edited him out. The way you delete a sentence from a draft and the surrounding text closes the gap so smoothly that no one would know something had been there. Only 2 people in the world remembered Ellis, me, because I'd opened the book, and Judith because she'd read it 30 years ago. We sat in her office that evening, after Tamsin had gone home. After the store was locked and the street outside was quiet, the book sat on its high shelf, silent and useless. 200 blank pages that had once contained something powerful enough to reshape a human mind, and then unwrite a human being from existence. "It happened before," Judith said. Her voice was the flattest I'd ever heard it. Stripped of performance, stripped of warmth, stripped of everything except the exhaustion of someone who has carried a secret for 3 decades and just watched it happen again. A man named Arthur. He was a regular, not an employee. He found the book before I understood what it could do. He read it. The perception started. I watched it accelerate in him the way it's been accelerating in Ellis. Faces first, then patterns, then the deeper structures. He said he was starting to understand the grammar of something underneath everything. He used that exact word, grammar. And then one morning he wasn't at his usual table. His apartment had a new tenant. The library, where he'd had a card for 20 years, had no record of him. His sister, when I found her, she didn't have a brother. Where do they go? Judith was quiet for a long time when she spoke. She chose her words with the care of someone handling something fragile. "I think the book is a lens, a perceptual tool that teaches you to see reality at increasing levels of resolution. And I think there's a threshold, a level of perception, beyond which you become visible to something that exists at that depth, something we can't see from the surface. And when it sees you, or when you see it clearly enough, a kind of exchange happens. You move from this level to that one, and this level heals over. The gap closes. The world doesn't tolerate a missing person. It rewrites itself, so there was never anyone to miss." "That's terrifying." "Yes. And you believe this?" "I believe I got close enough to the edge to feel the pull. I believe I chose to stop, and that choice is the reason I'm still here. And I believe the cost of stopping was everything that made me a person who could connect with other people. I traded depth of perception for the ability to stay human. And some days, I'm not sure I made the right call." I asked her about the blank book. She took a long breath. "The book was never just a book," she said. "I've thought about it for 30 years. I think it's a carrier, a vehicle for something that needed a physical form to interface with human cognition. Whatever was in those pages, whatever I read, whatever Ellis read, it was alive. Not biologically, informationally. It was a pattern that could transfer itself into a mind that was ready to receive it. And now it's blank because whatever was in it has moved into Ellis, maybe into you, into the air, I don't know. But the book is a husk now. The thing that lived in it found somewhere else to be. I left the store that night and walked home. The streets were ordinary. Cars, pedestrians, neon signs. The whole unremarkable pageant of a city evening. I felt normal. I felt like myself. Whatever had lived in the book, if anything had, it hadn't made its presence known to me. I was not perceiving the secret grammar of reality. I was not seeing the machinery behind people's faces. I was just a person walking home after the worst day of her life. Having lost a friend, not to death, but to something worse, to an absence, so total that the world had swallowed the whole. For 3 days, I felt nothing unusual. I went to work, I helped customers, I shelved books. Tamsin chatted about her new apartment search. Judith watched me the way you watch a pot you suspect is about to boil. Attentive, patient, prepared. I ignored her while I grieved Ellis in the strange, suffocating way you grieve someone that no one else knows existed. Which is to say, I grieved in complete isolation, surrounded by people who would have thought I was delusional if I had tried to explain who I'd lost. On the 4th day, I was at a coffee shop before my shift. The barista, a young woman I'd seen 100 times, whose name I knew was Kara, who always spelled my drink order on the cup in cramped handwriting, handed me my coffee and said, "Have a good one." Standard, automatic, the verbal wallpaper of a service interaction. But as she said it, I saw her blink, and in the blink, in the microsecond of her eyes closing and opening, I knew she'd been crying that morning. Not guessing, not inferring from puffy eyes or a raw nose. I knew it the way I knew my own name. The information was there in the architecture of her face, in a language I hadn't spoken 4 days ago and now couldn't stop hearing. I stood at the counter, holding my coffee, and I felt the floor tilt. It was small. It was barely anything, a single data point that could have been intuition, projection, coincidence. But the clarity of it, the absolute crystalline certainty, was nothing I'd felt before. It wasn't a guess, it was a reading. That afternoon on the bus to work, I sat across from an older man in a gray coat. He was looking out the window, his face slack, his hands folded in his lap, and I saw, effortlessly, involuntarily, the way you see color or shape, that he was constructing a lie. I couldn't hear it, couldn't read his mind, but the pattern was there. The slight asymmetry in his jaw, the rehearsal tension in his forearms, the way his gaze kept returning to a fixed point outside the window, as if anchoring himself to a script. He was about to meet someone. He was going to tell them something that wasn't true. And the lie was structural. Not a small one, not a white one, but a load-bearing lie. The kind that holds up a relationship or a life. I looked away. My hands were shaking. That evening, after closing, I sat alone in my apartment. The TV was off. My phone was on the table, face down. The room was quiet in a way that felt less like silence and more like the pause between two notes. A gap that implied the next sound was coming. I opened my laptop. I meant to check my email. Instead, my hands went to the keyboard and I started writing. Not thinking about what to write, just writing. The words came the way breath comes, automatically, involuntarily from a place below conscious decision. I typed for 7 hours. I didn't eat. I didn't get up. I didn't stop. When I finally lifted my hands from the keyboard, the sky outside was gray with early dawn. My shoulders ached, my eyes burned. On the screen in front of me were 26 pages of single-space text. This text, everything you've just read. The bookstore, Judith Ellis, the night he read the book, Mrs. Thorne. The blank pages, the disappearance, the apartment with the wrong woman in it. Tamsin's vacant expression when I said his name. I read it back, all of it, and two things struck me simultaneously. The first was that the account was accurate. Every detail, every conversation, every sequence of events, it was true. I hadn't embellished, I hadn't dramatized. It was a faithful record of what happened. Told in a voice that was mine, but more structured than my thoughts usually are. As if someone had taken the raw material of my memory and organized it into something designed to be received, designed to be read. The second thing was the warmth. Faint, but unmistakable. The same warmth I'd felt when I held the book, that sense of something alive in the object. Something that pulsed at a frequency just below perception. I felt it now radiating from the screen, from the words. From the pattern they made on the page, I understood then. Not fully. Not the way Ellis understood at the end, with the terrible clarity that had erased him from the world, but enough. The book was never a book, it was a signal. A pattern that needed a medium to travel through and a mind to land in. For decades, maybe centuries, the medium had been those 200 pages bound in brown leather. But a book is a limited vector. It sits on a shelf, it waits. It can only reach the people who physically find it and open it. What I'd written was the same signal in a new form. Faster, farther. A story that could travel through screens, through networks, through the vast connective tissue of a world that shares everything it reads with everyone it knows. The book hadn't gone blank because its content had been used up. It had gone blank because it had evolved. It didn't need pages anymore. It had me. I stared at the screen for a long time. I told myself I'd written this as a record, a warning, a way to document what happened to Ellis so that someone, somewhere, would know he existed, even if the world had forgotten him. But I know what Ellis taught me in the weeks before he vanished. The hardest thing about seeing clearly is recognizing when you're lying to yourself. This isn't a warning. I know exactly what will happen if I share it. The words will land in someone's mind, and the pattern will begin its work, and the channel will start to open. Maybe slowly, maybe just a crack. Maybe just enough to notice something about the next face they see. A flicker of grief behind a smile. A lie forming in the muscles around someone's eyes. The silent architecture of a feeling that was never meant to be visible. I'm going to post this anyway. Not because I'm brave, and not because I've decided the risk is worth it. I'm gonna post it because the warmth behind my eyes won't let me close the laptop. Because the words are already here. Already shaped, already reaching toward you through the screen. And I'm no longer entirely the one in control of what I do with them. If you've read this far, I want you to do something for me. Look at someone, anyone. The next person you see, a stranger on the street. A coworker. Someone you love. Look at their face, not casually. Really look, study the set of their jaw, the tension around their eyes, the way their hands move when they think no one's watching. If you see only what you've always seen, then maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just a story. Maybe Ellis was just a man who had a breakdown, and Judith is just an eccentric bookshop owner, and I'm just a grief-stricken woman typing nonsense at 4 in the morning. But if you see something you didn't expect, something too specific to be imagination, too clear to be a guess, then I'm sorry, the book needed a new page, and I think you're reading it.